you have a ton of competition out there, right? First and foremost, let's just call it what it is. We know that to be true. So that empathy piece is really being able to identify with the caller to create connection, because it's all about the emotional connection with the patient. They're not calling for the what. The what is the prosthesis, right?
Yeah.
You have to deliver a good product, don't get me wrong, but it's the why behind it. What's their motivation? Why now? Why did they decide today was the day to reach out and finally do something, right? Because they've either had a jacked up mouth for 20 years, let's just have some real talk here, or they've had a piecemeal mouth that we talked about, or, there's another big category, right, with the drug crisis that we have, right? They have a bombed out mouth, they've now clean and sober, and they've gotten so far in their career, but they're hitting that ceiling because they just can't advance further because of it.
Hello, everyone. Rob Lejeune and Greg Essenmacher here. We're going to jump right into all on four treatments in the dental practice. Greg, I want to jump into, I think, a critically important question to start talking about, and that is when a patient's in the chair and they're kind of ready for all on X treatment, what are the types of things a dentist could do to lose that patient and not convert? Like, what are the pitfalls or the things that they say that the patient just kind of walks away and doesn't accept the treatment plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question right out the gate, Rob. And, I think really the theme of it would be talking over them, talking over the patient. And let me explain a little bit more about that, because it's twofold, maybe even threefold. What we see often is, and we teach this as well, when I say talking over the patient, if a patient asks a question or is curious about something, or even reading their body language, making sure that we acknowledge where that patient's at and then answering their question. Doesn't mean you have to answer it directly, right? If a patient's asking early on, well, how much does that cost? And some clinicians will talk about money. We really recommend at G&A Consult, doctors don't talk about money. There tends to be a disconnect there. Having somebody who's a financial coordinator or a treatment coordinator, we feel that it's best, and we know with clients that we work with that it's best. And then the last part is to ask another question, driving the conversation forward. Look, doctors, you're the expert, 1,000% on the clinical side, and really need to be able to detail the patient. And then that's the second part of not talking over them. Look, you've been to school a really long time, probably been doing these cases a really long time, but I even fall into this, talking too much lingo, right? Dental lingo, right? Talking about a pano, right? Patients don't know what a pano is, right? This is critically important. Talking about the maxilla or the mandible. I mean, you say maxilla and they're starting to look for a T-Rex coming into the operatory
Yeah.
behind them, right?
Yeah.
So really simplifying the language, and I call dumbing it down. You certainly will have patients in the chair who have been to maybe 2 or 3 consultations for these big cases and really know their stuff, but that's really the exception rather than the rule. And what we know to be true, patients that are in your chair, there's so much information that they're receiving during a consultation, especially for all on X. You said all on four, and hopefully you don't get sued by the company that actually coined that, so we won't go down that path.
All on X.
Right, all on X, teeth in a day, fix full arch, whatever you want to call it. That's what we call it, fix full arch. But on a serious note, there's so much information that's provided that it's through all the learning and all the studies that about 20% of the information is actually what's retained by the patients. So what they remember are stories or something that are parallels or metaphors or analogies that are used. And so understanding how to communicate to the patient and the personality style of the patient. So an example of that is if you're talking to somebody who's an engineer, talking about structure, right? Structure and design of the framework of what you're about to do in order to secure the implant, secure the prosthesis, certainly talk about structure. If you have somebody who's an artist or a designer, right, or somebody who does home staging or interior design, certainly talk more on an artistic level of the work that's done with the prosthesis. So it's really matching the person
So
that's
hold on,
in your
Greg.
chair.
I completely agree with this, but it's based on the assumption that the doctor knows who they're talking to. And I know you're a big proponent of having empathy and getting to know the patient. So then back up and talk about how the doctor needs to know who's sitting in the chair and what type of personality they have to then know how to talk to them. And they have to actually be a good listener. So talk about the importance of that in this patient conversion moment.
Well, and we dove right into patients sitting in the chair. Here's some of the pitfalls to avoid. It starts so well before then, Rob, right? And we talk about this at G&A Consult. It starts so much earlier in the process, especially if you're doing any direct to consumer marketing. It really starts with the team. And it starts, we call it the hand off, hand up. It's all about gathering information along the way and providing you, the doctor, with information well before you even walk in and greet the patient. This information of getting some background on the patients before you even lay eyes on that patient is critically important. And that really is reliant on your team, making sure they're well skilled from the time that that lead comes in and being able to discern, so what is your dental condition? What is going on? Let me learn a little bit more about you. It's not the 90-second hygiene call where name, rank, and serial number, and you're putting them in the hygiene chair for the 50 to 70 new patients, and the sieve at the bottom's going out, right? These new patient calls for full arch are 7 to 8 minutes long. And so team being trained on that and being able to gather information and learn what big category do they fall into. Is it that they haven't been to a dentist in 20 years? Or is it that they have the piecemeal mouth, right? And when I say the piecemeal, it's do they have a root canal with the crown? And they have a bridge on the other side. And now they're missing another tooth. And now they cracked a tooth. And so it's just finally time, Jenny. You got to do something about it because they've been made fun of. What's the motivation now for that patient to be in front of you? Because these pieces of information give that doctor an opportunity before they even walk in to greet the patient. They start to build a picture of who they're about to talk to. So they have an idea of avoiding these pitfalls during the conversation. And then that hand off, hand up in front of the patient gets them warmed up to and allows the doctor to say to the patient, so Jenny, tell me, is this all that it's going on, after they're hearing it in front of the patient? Because the patient gets a chance to hear what they've already told the treatment coordinator or the dental assistant or whomever it is that actually greeted them in the reception area after they've had the phone call, booked the consultation, landed in your office, had the digital records taken, no matter what that process is. But it's really all about that process leading up to before the doctor itself gets in front of the patient to be able to avoid those pitfalls. So we kind of jumped into the doctor part, which I think is critically important, but there's so much that happens before, and the team really needs to be prepared, trained, coached in order to be best at what they do to maximize on the marketing dollars that you're spending, doctors, right? And it's not just about, I'll spend more on marketing, I'll get more cases, I'll get more consults. Because sure, you got to do your part, but there's so much that happens in the process. Does that make sense?
Total sense. So then, to be fair, let's back up. Now it's the 7-minute phone call that the front office staff is fielding. So someone's calling in, asking questions about fixed full arch. What are you training that staff? What kind of questions are you wanting them to ask? What kind of notes are you wanting them to take to do the hand off, hand up? I love that. Very catchy and easy to remember, so that they're setting up the clinician for success when the patient does.
Yeah, well, being able to frame this is all about the marketing that's being done, right? The direct-to-consumer marketing, whether it's done on Meta, which is the Facebook, Instagram, or the Google. We'd love for those phone calls to be able to come in, but typically it's through form fills. But it could also be through magazines or postcards or TikTok, or, if TikTok's still around, it's coming and going and coming and going, or any other platform that's really out there, or even organic through SEO. So the vast majority of the time, those leads are coming in. First and foremost, Rob, it's speed to lead. Everything is about getting to those leads immediately. Now, it doesn't mean you need to have somebody sitting in a corner twiddling their thumbs just waiting for that lead to come in. There's notification apparatus. So to get to your question of what you said, so what does that conversation look like? We teach a very simple formula because we believe and know with our clients that formulas work, scripts not so much. We want people, personality to come out. We want it to sound like that. We don't want people to sound like me, a 53-year-old white male from Detroit, right? We want it to sound naturally like them, because if not, they'll sound too robotic. And so the simple formula is EAZ. It's easy, right? Simple, actually. It's not easy, right? It's not easy to implement. But the reason why that formula, it starts with empathy, right? These callers and these patients that are asking and inquiring, you have a ton of competition out there, right? First and foremost, let's just call it what it is. We know that to be true. So that empathy piece is really being able to identify with the caller to create connection, because it's all about the emotional connection with the patient. They're not calling for the what. The what is the prosthesis, right?
Yeah.
You have to deliver a good product, don't get me wrong, but it's the why behind it. What's their motivation? Why now? Why did they decide today was the day to reach out and finally do something, right? Because they've either had a jacked up mouth for 20 years, let's just have some real talk here, or they've had a piecemeal mouth that we talked about, or, there's another big category, right, with the drug crisis that we have, right? They have a bombed out mouth. They've now clean and sober, and they've gotten so far in their career, but they're hitting that ceiling because they just can't advance further because of it. And now that they have been clean and sober for a while, maybe it's a family member, they've been able to piece together some finances, and they want to get to the next level. There's others, and I know that's really broad categories, but being able to identify with the caller on the other line, it's not only to get them to convert into a consultation, right, with that empathy piece. It's assuring them, hey, this is the right spot to come to. That's the big A. And the small a, we've talked about with the doctor. It's acknowledging questions that they have. It's answering their question without necessarily blurting out numbers, but really letting them know each patient is really different. That's why we bring you in. And then asking another question, driving that conversation forward. And the Z part, it's a word people usually don't use that often anymore. It's zeal. And I talk with a lot of zeal, a lot of passion, a lot of energy. Most callers, most of these individuals, when you're engaging with them, it's been a while since they've really had a lot of energy, passion, joy in life because they cover their mouth. They really don't eat the foods that they want to anymore. Or maybe, they do eat some foods and they have to be very mindful, or they don't go out. So what's the motivation for them to come now? Right? Maybe it's because they don't go out to eat with their spouse anymore and it's affecting their marriage, or they're newly in the dating pool. Or take the easy layup, Rob, right? Which is my daughter's getting married in 6 months and it's important for me. Pictures are forever. I mean, those are the easy ones, right? But we know if we can get to the motivation, that's why the calls should last longer, because it'll reduce the no-show and get more swings at the plate. That's where you get those pieces of information to hand off and hand up internally when the patients do show up for those consultations.
So I love the acronym EAZ: empathy, acknowledge, and zeal. I'm taking notes here, Greg. In that step of empathy, you mentioned, finding their why. Why is it that they want treatment? And you just gave a bunch of examples that I'm sure you've heard. And if I'm the patient, if I understand a couple things, like if I'm thinking, I just hung up the phone and I understand that they know, they understand why I want this, and I can trust them, right? That they can take care of me, then the likelihood that I'm going to book a consultation and drive down to the practice and give them my time goes way up, right? And I would submit that people make an emotional decision to buy before they start to justify that decision with logic and ration. Do you agree with that?
I do 100%. And you touched on something there, the word trust. And this is really critically important, because anytime you're doing direct-to-consumer marketing, there really is no trust, right? Because in the beginning, because they're finding you on a Facebook ad or a Facebook or Instagram, or on a Google ad if they're actually seeking something, right, in general. They don't know you from the guy down the street, right? They know the pretty pictures or the video from your landing page or your website. It's not like a traditional referral from another doctor or from another patient, because then there's a transfer of authority and trust. But if it's just a direct-to-consumer model, there's this big funnel, and you're just trying to capture and whittle it down to where there is some trust built in. And it gets to another point, Rob, which I think is critically important, and that's consistency of messaging. And we work with our clients on this a lot. And let me tell you in just one little example of this. It doesn't matter if you call it a CT scan, a CBCT, or a cone beam, or digital records even, right? And so for somebody in 3D like
Or
you
pictures.
all are at Rebel, right, or pictures, it doesn't matter what you call it, But is it called the same thing everywhere? On your digital imprints, right? So that means on all of your advertising, from the first phone call to when they get into the practice, to the person taking those digital records when they first come in for their consultation, to the assistant, to the doctor, to all the way through. Because if they're calling it something different or they see something different as a patient, it's a microfracture of trust. They don't know exactly why. When you get to the end all be all dollar of that 20, 30, 50, $60,000 case, but something in the back of their mind says, because it's all those little pieces of trust you have to build along the way to where they say, like you said, that emotional before the logic kicks in and says, okay, do I want to fill in the blank? Now, whether it's piecing together the finance part or whether it's signing a loan for 12 years at $400 or $500 a month, I mean, think about that for a second, right? It's probably one of the biggest purchases they're going to make, save for a house or maybe a vehicle, just depending on what their life situation is, whether they buy new or used vehicles. This is one of the biggest decisions they're going to make. And so it's so critically important to be consistent in messaging because of building that trust with the patient. And anyone in the chain can break it just a little bit. Doesn't mean it's going to make the yes or no, but you have to continually throughout the process of the walk flow of the patient. I like to call it the walk flow because that's really what they're doing. And their spidey ears are up the entire process. So being able to have consistency, that's why we listen to phone calls with those that are doing phone calls. We watch the consultations and be able to show body language, right? Do they wince or does a facial expression change when the money comes up with a treatment coordinator or financial coordinator or whatever you call them in your practice? These little subtle things can really start to move the needle in percentages, single digit and sometimes double digits when it comes to percentages of close. And that's so critically important too for a practice that's trying to be more successful when it comes to full arch. It's super competitive. Everybody knows that. And if you want a bigger slice of the pie and a higher return on your investments when it comes to marketing and team, that's really what is a big key too.
Yeah, I love that term, microfracture of trust, because they're small little things that tend to snowball or add up. Do you have your offices that you consult with create like a glossary of terms and it's like everyone meets and it's like, for this thing, CBCT, we're only going to call it this, and we're all going to use the same word for this? And can you fit all that onto one page? And is it like 20 terms or is it like 100 terms? Like, I totally agree. Like, if everyone's speaking the same language, you're not introducing potential confusion to the patient. Also, the patient might falsely perceive that if everyone's using different terminology, I wonder, do they really know what they're doing? Right? I
Yeah,
mean, is
do you
that kind of
remember?
what you're getting at?
Yeah, do you remember when they used to be door-to-door salesmen and they'd have the Encyclopedia Britannica? That's what we do with all our clients. I'm kidding. That's not what we do with all of our clients. We have something called the single sheet. All of our clients, and it's created, I was going to say day one, but let's be realistic. It's within the first week or two of onboarding our clients, and we do what's called a single sheet. And a single sheet basically is every step of the process for a full arch patient. And it's very simple. It just starts with consultation, right? And then it goes through the process, right? Consultation, records day, once they say yes. Some call it a smile design. They all have the different names for it, and that's fine, right? Surgery day, post-op, when does post-op happen, all the way through to prototype, final delivery, and then hybrid maintenance. Yes, there needs to be hybrid maintenance, hopefully, right? Because that's a big differentiating factor for a lot of your practices, at least the ones that I'm talking to, I think now, in this venue, right? Because there are some of the big box stores that don't do that. They'll do the hybrids, they'll do the full arch, and then on your merry little way you go, right? I think that's a big differentiating factor to be able to let patients know that you're going to be taking care of them end-to-end solution. But back to what I was saying with the single sheet, just really the highlight, what do you call that step? It should be super simple. Most of them, it's less than 3 or 4 words, right? 3 or 4 words, and then a bullet point or two of what happens. Not elongated sentences, but certainly in that consultation it says CBCT taken or CT scan taken. That's all it says. And everyone in the practice from the surgeon to the janitor to the front desk to the surgical assistant to the treatment everyone in the practice is responsible for knowing that single sheet by the end of 30 days. Period. No
I love
excuses.
that.
And and there might be a little bit of bribery that happens with us when we go in at 30 days, bribery meaning like Starbucks gift cards, right? At huddle, we do it in the huddle, right? So it's rolled out prior to, right? We do the onboarding meeting and that's already settled and we've already got that done by the time we do the onboarding meeting. But by that second in-office visit, that's at the huddle. I'm usually there in the second in-office visit as well, along with their coach that reinforces what we do with the online training that's recorded and customized. So tell me, what's the first step? What's the second step? What's involved in the third step? And go through it just verbally. It takes less than 5 minutes. And it really generates a lot of momentum. And then those that didn't do it, they can be quiet. Nobody gets called out. It's not a shame game, right? I don't do blame and shame. There's no point in that. But it's really just lifting up, and it's kind of fun because some people get some nice Starbucks gift cards, and then throughout the day they're like, what, I'm gonna spend my Starbucks to walk in, with their Starbucks. It's really a fun exercise, and there's a Starbucks practically on every corner, so that's why we like to do Starbucks.
Okay, so back to the process. So they make a phone call. There's an intelligent, thoughtful, empathetic conversation with some office staff. They're now coming in. So there's some good notes taken. Everyone's using the same language. They come in, they sit down with the doctor in the treatment coordination room. There's a warm handoff and a conversation there so the patient can hear that there's this transference of trust from the first person they talk to the doctor. So now back to the doctor. If I'm the patient and I'm on the fence, what type of training do you give the doctor of how to have an intelligent conversation with the patient to move them to say yes? Like, how are you helping doctors increase their conversion with that interaction?
Yeah, a lot of times, well, I'm going to give you that answer that everybody hates, and the word is depends. And what it depends on is really the skill level of the team that's around the doctor. The most expensive thing in any office, period, is the doctor's time. So if 100%. We can start to reduce the engagement of doctor time with the patients. Now, I'm not saying we want to cut it down to 2 or 3 minutes. Just come in. Oh, yeah, I see your CT scan. Yep, looks like you're a good candidate for this. Let's do it, right? Who wants to be a candidate, especially after the season we just went through with politics? Nobody wants to be a candidate, right? But this is what I see, and getting the patient, the doctor on the patient side of let's see what we can do for you. Yay, right? But I mean, not in that silly way. But that's really what we work with, right? The handoff, hand up from the person who's taking the records. Now, whether your flow is you've got a surgical assistant that's really well skilled and greets and builds rapport and does that, or whether the treatment coordinator, if you have somebody who's coached up and trained up in that manner, they're the ones who are starting the process, handing it over to the doctor. The doctor does their clinical assessment and then does the handoff, hand up, transfer of authority, back to the treatment coordinator to really work on what that close looks like, because that person has to have the connection with the patient. Because then the back and forth goes of, so tell me what your thoughts are. Where are we at right now in the process? Certainly there's going to be questions. And the great thing is, Rob, that where we're at now compared to where we were 5 years ago, right? Money was flowing free. Money was cheap. People were ready to sign on the dotted line a lot differently. But there have been same-store sales comparisons with full arch clinics, those that are doing a bunch of full arch. Same-day closes, right? Meaning they sign on the dotted line that day that they come in for the consultation and say, yep, sign me up for an arch or two. I'm good. There's a huge disparity between those numbers. However, if you look at the close ratio of those same locations, 7 days. Within 7 days of the consultation, they're minimal. And what that tells us, and what we know to be true, is that it really is about the follow-up. Because if you're going to make that type of investment, you certainly, at least I know I would need to talk to what we call the financially interested party, right? Somebody back home, because it really is, it's a team sport. If I'm going to add to our budget, right, our spending budget, $300-400 a month, or $600 or $700 a month, if we're talking about a $50,000-$60,000 procedure with specialized implants, I certainly better get the buy-in. That's why not just the follow-up with the patients, where that connection with that treatment coordinator who has the time and attention to do so. It's not just what they're doing, it's how they're doing it. It's the pieces of what they're sharing. Because this is what we know to be true. And you just talked about it earlier, and it was so savvy of you to bring it up. And I can't believe you brought it up, right? It's like you're giving me layups here, right? You know, I love Phil Jackson. He talks about it's a team sport. It's like we're playing a team sport here, right? I don't even have to be your Kobe. I'll be your Shaq that comes in and gives up some of my points and rebounds to get the title. I'm good. But it really is all about that emotional connection and really becoming emotionally invested in that brand new smile for our patients. When they come in, if we do our job well in the clinic, they're really invested in it. Then we get to the money part, and it's okay, let me see how we can figure this out, but I need to fill in the blank, right? I see what I pre-qualified for with a third-party financing company. I have a really good relationship with my credit union. Let me see if I can get a better number. Let me go talk to my spouse. Whatever those things are. They don't necessarily have to be obstacles. It's let me just go look at some things to see if I can do it a little bit better than what you've been able to offer. Totally reasonable. So the emotions are high of will, wanting to do it, right? Then it's just a matter of how. How am I putting it together? As soon as they leave the practice, that emotional high starts to fade a little bit.
100%.
Then they
Yes,
go
you're
home,
absolutely right.
and if they only retain, say, 20% of the technical information of all of it, right? Because they've gone a while with what they've got in their mouth already. And they're going home and explaining to a spouse, a neighbor, brother, sister, uncle, mother, whoever it is in the home about, I want to have this done. Oh, but Jenny, you've been like that for like what? Really? $500 a month for the next 12 years? Right? Now, what happens? It's like letting air out of a balloon a little bit at a time. That's why what they do and what platform and how, you got to stoke that again. You got to get their emotional gauge back up. And that's the things that we teach, and we know in that same store sales study. Try saying that three times really fast,
That's a
right?
tongue
But
twister.
we know in that 7-day close ratio that it's really about re-engaging them and reminding them, what is the goal? What was your initial why? And how do we re-engage that to keep them motivated? And those are the critical pieces of the follow-up, because so often when we go into a practice, it's, so share with us, what is your follow-up procedure? Yeah, when they don't say yes, we put it in our practice management system. We put it in Open Dental or EagleSoft or whatever practice management system they're using. And okay, because that's why metrics matter, and why we use trackers that really show it on a simple screen and holding accountability. It's not because we want to beat people up over it, but we see in a simple format of that follow-up, and we see the close ratios go up. And that's why we call them hidden arches, because there's hidden arches. If you've been doing marketing and advertising for any period of time, there are arches sitting in your practice right now. I guarantee it. And I'm not a person that says guaranteed, right? Guaranteed 10 arches in the next month. Or I don't guarantee much of anything, but I can guarantee if you've been marketing and advertising for more than a handful of months, I guarantee there's hidden arches sitting in your pile right now of those who didn't move forward and say yes. There just is. There is in every single practice that we've worked with and have worked with and are working with it to a practice. And that's really where it is. It's about the follow-up.
Yeah, so focusing on follow-up is just as important as focusing on the new patient phone calls. And actually, I'd probably say more important, because hopefully they're already warm to you. There's already a level of trust. They've already come to see you. They're going to take your call, right? And as you were telling that story about the patient having the conversation with the financially interested party, if I'm a doctor, I would want that patient in the midst of that conversation when the other person says, well, Rob, do you really want to spend $500 a month? I would want my answer to be, well, yeah, but I want to accomplish this, or the doctor is going to help me get to this place, right? Mm-hmm. And if they can keep that connection, that's going to overcome the financial hurdle, because it is a financial hurdle. It's a big decision. It's likely going to be, are we going on a cruise or not for the next 2 years? Or are
Right.
we selling our cabin in the mountains? Or am I not going to buy a new car? I mean, that's the level of decision making these people are going through. So they have to value their smile more than the alternatives of spending that money.
Yes, 1,000%. And that's where it's so critically important to get to the motivation, right? To get to the why. And even to bring it back to the, right, it's the setup and it's the follow up, right? It's both ends of the spectrum. I don't know that one is necessarily more important than the other, because if you go back to the setup, right, you go back to the lead call, you go back to that very beginning. What we teach, coach, and train is that in that piece, and it, God bless all the individuals and humans in the world that work any type of phone calls in this capacity or in any other industry, but especially in this one, right? Because they're working the phones, they're not getting a hold of anyone, they're leaving messages, they're doing follow up, they're doing the 4 touches in 4 days. They're really trying to get a hold of people, and it's a challenge, right? Because of those 100 leads, half of them aren't really leads, right? They're just bogus. There's a lot of challenge, right? I really do respect what they do. But when you get to that end of that conversation, you spend that 7, 8, 10 minutes. And then what we ask them to do is say, so who else who else will you be bringing with you that day? They don't want to ask that question, because their primary purpose is to just book consultations. They're like, but Greg, when
Mm.
I say that, then sometimes I'm going to lose the consultation. You are, but you're also not setting up the rest of your team to actually close the cases.
Mm.
And if we set our practices up well, everybody's incentivized on one thing: the profitability, which is closing cases. Doesn't mean they're all compensated equally, but to what they contribute. That's why when we work with practices as well, it's what is the value of a consultation? Just somebody showing up. Well, if it's just having somebody show up, then I can bring in a homeless person or somebody who just got out of prison a month ago who literally has no family and nowhere to go. If that counts the same as somebody who's pre-qualified, who literally has the money, highly motivated, went to 3 other consultations, knows that this is the place to go because they've already been here once before, and I can book that consultation. Are those 2 consultations of equal value? Then why would we compensate them equally by saying, here, we'll give you X amount of dollars as a bonus when a consultation shows up? It's not. Doctors, please stop doing that, right?
Mm.
Get a
Yeah,
little
I
more
agree.
savvy and sophisticated on how you're going to do that. But back to that point of saying, who's another financially interested party, or who will you be bringing with you that day? And as soon as you get that objection, oh, I can't come by myself. Of course you can, Jenny. However, it is a lot of information, and having an extra set of ears, even I find that it's helpful whenever I go in for any type of medical appointment. Oh,
So you're
yeah, that makes
recommending
sense.
they bring the financial interested party with them. That's
Bring
brilliant. It's
someone.
kind of an
Bring
obvious point.
someone. Bring someone. Bring a buddy. Bring someone who can help with the information. Because if one person retrains 20%, how often is it that somebody else hears something a little different and can add to? And then once they leave and that emotional high starts to fade and they're going to talk to a spouse, then they can bring their buddy in if it's not the spouse and it's not the financial interested party, right? To call in their friend, call in their friend Mildred. Hey, come on over. He's not buying in. You got to help me out here, right? Because that person, Jenny, wants to get the procedure done. Sometimes they
Yeah.
just need backup to convince Ed, hey, loosen it up, right? You got to sell your hunting cabin. You go up there once a year for deer hunting. You don't need it. You got 3 other guys who have one. You don't need your own, right? So this is the concept behind it, and this is what we encourage. We don't mandate anything to any of our clients. We simply share best practices from our clients all over the country of how we've seen them move the needle faster, stronger, in order to be more successful at what they
Do
do in full arch.
do you have any data on, let's assume it's a married couple and they bring their spouse with them, and if they do bring their spouse, is there data on better conversion rate because they both heard it together and they both have this experience and emotional attachment and they understand the process together? Is there a better conversion rate if the married couple comes in together?
We do with a couple of our clients, and I can share case studies absolutely. And it's more on the speed to conversion, how quickly they convert, because they'll do more frequently. What we track are things like what are the applications that go through, just to give them an idea of where they're at currently, right? In order to what funds are available if you want to use a third party financing company, which we recommend at least pulling because it's a soft pull on credit, right? Make sure there's soft pulls on credit. There's a few that aren't, right? Make sure you know and you have the right information. What we know to be true is that the likelihood of being able to pull those applications when a spouse or a financially interested party is with the patient themselves is 2.5 times more likely. So at least knowing
There
where
you
they
go.
lay out, it's
Yeah,
huge for
huge.
clients of ours, right? Because then there's, again, and it goes back to the trust factor, right? If somebody's by themselves, I know for me, like I'm always a little leery, right? Don't sell me anything. Let me get there. Provide me with information. And if I feel like I can trust you, then I'm going to get there, right? That's me personally, right? It's just who I am, right? So again, it goes back to that personality type. Are you speaking my language? Are you allowing me enough time to get there? And depends on the consultation time, the amount of time as well. That's why doctors speaking more clinical, obviously they have to be warm and genuine and authentic, but not so much the doctor speaking dollars. And I know there's going to be some of you doctors listening out there that are going to say, no, I'm the one who talks about the, how much things are and it works for me and I close at a high percentage. Great. If it's working for you, that's great. What we find and know to be true is that you are the most expensive thing in your practice. If you want to grow and scale the full arch side of your practice, having you do the vast majority of the time with patients and consultations, it's not scalable.
Greg, I'm a huge believer in just the fundamental truth of leadership. And if you're an individual and you want to scale your time, the only possibility is building a team of people around you. Because we all have 24 hours in a day, and you can't work 18 hours a day every day without getting burnout. So if you want to scale your time, you have to scale it through capable, competent, empathetic, talented people. You have to build a team to do things for you, with you, and help you. And that's another challenge for dentists. These highly clinical, highly trained individuals who are running a business, and they're kind of like they are the CEO inside of a small business, and they need to build a team of competent people around them to scale and grow. Otherwise, they're going to hit their Peter principle, right? Their own glass ceiling of how much they can produce if they're spending, lots of time with every patient, because that, you can only do so much. So I love
Yeah,
that
and
point.
it's leveraging time, as you say. I've got a good friend of mine, Elijah Desmond, likes to say it's bending time, right? And it's all about specializing what you're really good in, right? And clinicians are really good, and some are better than others, like with the patient engagement, and that's great. But specialize in what you're really good in. Be the best possible clinician you possibly can be, and allow others to specialize in the patient engagement part, in the working with patients on the financing part. Allow those doing lead calls to become specialized in converting your leads, your marketing dollars, into consultations and reducing the no-show rate. Let people specialize in what they do. Of course, you want to have an overarching view of your entire business, but to scale and grow, that's the way to go about doing it in a concerted manner. Because, I've had to learn that in my business, and it's difficult. It's difficult to let go of the pieces, especially if you're a clinician that started by doing an arch every 6 weeks or so, and now you've gotten to a couple arches a month, and now you're scaling well beyond that. It's very difficult to do. I know that personally. And that's really where some of our coaching comes in for our top clients, our accelerator clients. I work with those clients on the mindset, the abundance mindset, how to delegate better, but also how to make sure that the quality control is there, and finding the right people and giving them the skills and helping them to level up their skills in what they're doing. And so you still have the opportunity to have reporting to come up through you, but not necessarily have to mire down in the details of it.
Totally agree. True for every business, working on your business more than working in your business. And we could talk about that for a long time, but I want to set up, I want to set you up with a scenario of how you could help me. So I'm a dentist. I'm doing an arch every 6 weeks. I'm spending an average amount of money on marketing and advertising. So I have some leads coming in the door. I don't have a single sheet. I don't have all my staff speaking the same terminology. I'm just sort of cobbling together my own strategy. And then I'm like, all right, I want to go to the next level. Greg might be able to help me. So Greg, tell me, what does an engagement look like together? What's it cost? And like, what type of meaningful results should I expect? And it's probably different for every customer and all of that, but like, what kind of results or increase in conversion could you help me with?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's really three aspects that I talk to clinicians during a discovery call that we do, the complimentary discovery call. We look at three aspects that to a practice we find are the biggest areas of opportunity, right? One is on team development. And let me define that a little bit easier for everybody who's listening right now. It's roles and responsibilities. If everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. There needs to be one person who's responsible for those leads coming in, the speed to lead, the follow up. What does the cadence look like? Are you measuring the right things? And are they all measurable, right? There's an industry standard of where you should be with those leads. And that comes to the second point, which is in that marketing, are you holding the marketing company accountable? I don't care about impressions. Impressions don't impress me. If somebody's looking for a Hello Kitty doll and they count that as an impression, it's not a lead for you. There are certain metrics that need to be looked at, followed, and held accountable for what your messaging looks like. This is critically important. And in that, you should have a defined, unique selling proposition. What differentiates you so a patient's going to say yes to coming and seeing you, and then once they come and see you, to convert? And we've talked a lot about those pieces today, right? You know, the follow-up, right? The setup and the follow-up. And then lastly, which is one of the biggest areas, and most doctors think, no, mine are good, mine are great. It's the operational challenges, period. There are operational challenges with every single full arch clinic that we engage with. And when I say a full arch clinic, whether you've got a massive GP side of your business and you're just doing a little bit of full arch, right? One every once in a while and you're spending a little bit of money, there needs to be a micro team that's designated. And how does that integrate with the rest of the team? And this is where those workflows and processes come in place. If it's taking you many hours to do a single arch, you need to take a look at it. And so this is the engagement piece that you were just asking about. There's really two different levels to engage us at. There's two sides that we work with practices. One is on the teaching, coaching, training side of these pieces we've talked about today. On the lead call, converting them over, reducing no-shows, follow-up, treatment coordinators, helping in all of those pieces that is all customized to each of our clients. That's one big chunk of it. We can get into more details on that, but certainly I can share that with anyone who's listening. The other side is the operations side. Being able to peel off what your full arch business is from the rest of your business. Understanding your profitability is so critically important so
Your
that you
full arch,
know.
like business silo, right?
Absolutely. Being able to understand and know where are you in your stage of development and what does it actually cost to produce that arch and what is your profitability on that arch? Because if you don't know that, then being able to understand, like, is it time to do 3D printing or should you stay with the traditional route of having an outside lab come in and do it? Or if you are doing printing, who is doing the printing? Where are you sending for your digital record? Where are you sending out to have your digital files done? Is it stage 0 and 1 the best of where you're sending it now? And how about stage 2 or your prototypes that you're having done? All of these detail pieces and your supplies and this and all of those pieces. And so those two sides fall into two different categories of engagement that we do. For our top end clients, our accelerator clients, we are a very boutique and niche. And when we work with clients, it happens to be with weekly trainings that we do with all of our clients. And that's recorded, customized, and they get to keep all of those recordings as an evergreen platform. In addition, we also do weekly strategy sessions where we go over all of these strategies that we talked about today and more. And then it also includes monthly in-office engagement. And that's $11,900 per month, and it's a 6-month agreement. For those that want to
Amazing.
just do a little bit less, it's a growth package, and we still do both sides, But the P&Ls that we talked about, the input of data actually comes from the clinics themselves. We set up the outline, they input the data, and we still talk about it. The real big difference is that with the accelerator clients, we also do the operations work. We also do the clinical workflow. So we work with the dental assistants, helping to level up their skill so that they can reduce that chair time for each of the arches that you're doing. On the growth side, we stick to just the sales process when it comes to the training side. So still the lead calls, the treatment coordinator, and working in that whole process with the clinician as well, the hand off, hand up, all that process. And then again, with the operations, we really stick to providing the framework, and then all the data comes actually from the clinics themselves. And it's a once a quarter in office rather than once a month in office to be able to support those weekly trainings that are done with different touch points of the training process. And it's bi-weekly strategy sessions rather than weekly. So it just depends on how much you actually want to accelerate your growth with clients. And we have a lot of case studies that we can share as far as what we've seen with clients and their growth potential.
Give me kind of an average of what type of measured success are you seeing with the clients that are obviously they're taking it serious, they're engaged with you, they're showing up, they're putting in the effort. What are you seeing as far as some growth that they're achieving with your help?
Yeah, we had a client up in the Pacific Northwest that was doing, on average, 17 to 20 arches. Now, this is a really big operation. When we started engaging with them, 8 months later, they were doing 32 arches a month on average. So it was significant increase, and these are the hidden arches we were talking about. Yeah, and they really were engaged with a lot of marketing. It was honing in on messaging, on marketing, and really just working the funnel. And a lot of it also was on the operations side of freeing up time in that walk flow. We reduced the amount of time that clinicians were spending, right? The head doctor and even the associate, who is more of like he wasn't a prosthodontist. He was doing most of the restorative, and we really leveled up his skills to take over more of that 8 to 10 minute engagement when it came to doing those consultations, which was really an efficient way. And then scheduling optimization, right? That was critically important to stagger their schedule of consultations, because you have to understand what is industry standard for no-show rate, and that really optimized. And so when everybody showed up on one day, we still had another way to be able to deal with that, to be able to sub in somebody from the back, reset the clock so people didn't feel like they were waiting as long for their consultation. Lots of strategies. And then also with that accelerator client, it was a lot of the team structure and dynamic. We believe in coach up or coach out, right? If you want to be on board and you want to up level your skills and be a part of it, great. To a client, most of them know, because they'll ask us right in the beginning. So could you just let us know, like, is Jenny like a good team member? If you're asking us that question, first thing we look at is, have they had the training and support? Second is, if you're asking us that question, you probably know the answer, but let us dive into that in the first 30 days. Yeah, absolutely. And then another client is Southern California, was doing one arch every 6 weeks. And within a year, he told us the plan, said, look, I really want to transition a lot away. I want to create a surgical center. And within a year, he was doing 10 arches a month. I mean, that was his goal.
Amazing.
We did a lot of shift and adjust, and we moved a lot of bodies around as far as roles and responsibilities. And those are the two that really stand out, that most recently that we worked with, that really were, and those are the shining beacon on the hill. And I'll just be very honest, Rob. A lot of this is about collaboration. We have the
100%.
formulas. We have what works well. It's really about the clinicians. It's about the team members that say, yes, we're ready to go. We know what the formulas that work really well. And it's a lot in the beginning, for sure, but it's that partnership and it's that investment for clients. And I didn't know if I shared on the growth side, it's $5,900 a month for 6 months.
Okay.
If they want to do the growth side. That still is a big part of what we do. So that's why I say it's specialized, right? Because it's all customized programming that we do with our clients. And we love to learn about the practice, and we don't take every practice on that we talk to. Sometimes we share with them things that they really should invest in as far as time or structure to prepare for bringing us on, because most of our clients that do come on for the initial 6 months extend because of the results they're getting, whether it's at the same level or at a different level. Some start at levels and then move up to different levels, for sure.
Yeah, I'm assuming the fundamentals of doctor engagement, staff engagement are critically important for seeing some measured improvement with your help. Because if they're not engaged and their staff's not taking it serious, well, then, there's only so much you can do. Totally get that. You had mentioned a few moments ago, you said 3D printing and you got my ears perking up. So I've been patient over here waiting I have a passion
Chomping at
for,
the bit.
yeah, a passion for 3D dentistry as a category. I just think scanning and designing and digital processing is so much more predictable and cost effective and repeatable than analog processes. So if a doctor says, "Hey, Greg, thinking about getting a 3D printer, what do you think?" Right? Like, what's your reaction to a doctor who let's assume he's had an iOS scanner for a couple years. So he understands how to scan digitally and all of that, because I think buying an iOS scanner and buying a 3D printer at the same time is a lot. I would recommend a doctor start with scans and scan only processes with your lab. And then, when you're ready to consider maybe bringing on a printer or a mill, that's what you want to do. So, like, how do you help a doctor navigate? What have you seen as some successes of bringing on some digital technology, printing or milling? And then what are some like warning signs or failures that you've seen when a doctor wants to do that?
Well, Rob, just like we were talking about with patients, right? The motivation, the why behind the what. The what is the printer. The why is what's the motivation behind bringing this printer in. And that's where we start with clinicians when they say to us, hey, I'm thinking about bringing in a 3D printer, right? I'll tell you what is terribly unsuccessful, a few stories, and I won't go into some of the horror stories, that the names
Sure.
will be kept secret,
Yeah.
is when they go to a course, they go to a CE course, they go to an event, or they go to a show, and they buy a 3D printer, and they come back to the office, and the team looks around and says, oh, look, a 3D printer's showing up. And nobody really had any idea that this was going to happen, right? That's a big challenge because the team being aware of it and being integrated, some can pick it up pretty quickly, but that really starts to slow the growth. And now let me get back to what I was saying, right? Which is the why behind the what. Because what we do with our clients, to a client, is we'll go through the process and say, okay, so why are you getting this? What is it going to be used for mostly? Because it's not just for, say, for example, since we're talking about fixable arch, that's my lane, right? Being able to, scan body, send it over, have a design done, send it back, print out day of, temporary prosthesis. Who's going to stain and glaze, right? Where's that training going to come from? Great. Do you have the right plate for that? Awesome. Are you going to do just the temps or are you going to do finals? That's a whole different conversation. What resins are you going to use? Do you have that information? All of those things. But as well, it's how quickly are you going to pay for that piece of equipment? Because if you're doing bite splints, night guards, I could go right down the list on that same piece of equipment. Well, now you're going to pay that off much sooner as a piece. And then who is going to actually manage, maintain, learn on that 3D printer? Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be like a lab tech, because sometimes they get a little too techy anyway, right? So for some of the simple stuff, and what we've seen are really some advanced dental assistants, surgical assistants who take to it much more quickly and are actually better at, because they're the ones who are in the patient's mouth and going back and forth. And so these are the pieces that we go through, and then what are we going to do to be able to level up the training to be able to implement it sooner rather than later? And is it crawl, walk, run? Or are we just trying to run right away? Oh, well, I can get a design for $300. Oh, well, I can print for $60 in resin. Well, I can get that temporary prosthesis for $360. I'm going to do that instead of having a lab come in. That's costing me $3,000. Like, that's so much better. Well, let's slow our roll. How much does it really cost, right? And going through that process, and I think that's really where, Rebel 3D comes in, because they'll get way out over their skis and just look at, I'm just going to say it, love all the manufacturers of the world. I was one of the first employees for Neodent, right? When they launched the value line of Neodent in the US for Straumann Group. So grateful that I did help build that company up before I started G&A Consult 3 years ago. Like, we understand the sales and marketing side of 3D printers. But when we work with clients, we really look at all of the details of, like, how is it going to be implemented? How are you going to pay for it? Who is going to maintain it? Do you have all the facts and information? And if the answer is yes, and it makes a lot of sense on paper and in execution because you have the staff and the team and the resources and the cases and the output and the treatments that you're going to use it for, great. Because if you're talking about a night guard or a bite splint and you're charging $400 or $500 and it's costing you $200 or $300 to a lab and there's turnaround time and you can't do it like within an hour while the patient's in the chair within a few hours, and you're going to turn it around for $30 in resin and you can do it predictably and you're doing 10, 15 a month, I mean, now you got a nice little cushion windfall. So now you can play with the temporary prosthesis at the same time you're still doing your traditional route that you're already doing now. So you can try it out, do a couple of sample cases, and you're not completely dependent on it and sending a patient home. If that's your same day delivery of teeth, right? Don't get me wrong, there's different workflows, but that way you can try it out on a couple of patients and you still have your backup the analog way, if you will. These are the responsible ways to answer questions of the why behind the what. If a clinician comes to us, a client comes to us and says, so what do you think about getting a 3D printer? Or I'm thinking about getting a 3D printer. What do you think? That's how we really dissect it in a responsible way.
I think that's a great answer. And I love that you bring up, night guards and splints, because just that one prosthetic, if a doctor were to, present that treatment more often and grow that business to 15 to 20 splints a month, that'll pay for the printer in a couple months, 2 to 3 months. And so instead of it becoming a paperweight, you're now generating more increasing revenue and decreasing costs at the same time. I also believe a 3D printer is very approachable for a dental assistant to operate. Like the learning curve is not too long. They do need time to focus and work on it. The doctor should not be spending any significant amount of time managing the 3D printer. He should have a dedicated staff person who knows how to, outsource the design or design it themselves, whatever they choose, and then load it into the printer. They know how to nest it and orient it and what are the differences and why, and then load the resin, print it, cure it, polish it, all that kind of stuff. So there is a little bit of a mini lab setup in that scenario. But I think a dental assistant that's trained and supported by either an outside dental technician or they've gone to plenty of training themselves can be very effective with a 3D printer. Now, if a doctor says, I'm going to buy a mill and I'm going to replace my lab, I do think that's a whole nother ballgame. That is a much more significant investment, not only in machinery, but I would say at that point, you really are looking at hiring a dedicated dental technician and bringing them in to operate that equipment and that machinery. And that dedicated dental technician with that level of knowledge is not cheap. We know this. They're often 6-figure type technicians that are worth their salt. And it could work if you either are a high volume practice or you got a multi-site practice, but it's a whole nother thing to take serious. So I guess my question here is, have you seen success stories of a doctor getting into milling and like bringing milling in-house, and what does that take, and what's sort of the scope that needs to happen if a doctor's like, yeah, I'm gonna print my provisionals, I'm gonna mill my finals, I'm gonna do it all myself. That's a lot. So what do you see out there that's successful?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Actually had a client, it was about 2 years ago, who came forward with I'm going to buy a mill and didn't have a 3D printer. And we went through this process of tell me the why behind the what. And we went through this process of, okay, let's take a look at what you're doing. And we're in the fixed full arch lane. This is what we do at G&A Consult. However, there's such a huge side of the business that it's evolved into, let's take a sum total. And because we parse out the full arch side from the rest of the business, we have access to, for our accelerator clients, we see the rest of the business. We see what's driving the rest of the business, because it doesn't make any sense to move profits from the GP side of the business and just shift it over to full arch. The whole goal is to add to be a value add, to add on top, not to shift from one side to the other. And so we have to be mindful. So with this client, we took a look at that side and said, look, you're doing this business. This is what it's costing you over here for these bite splints and night guards. That's why it always comes to mind for me. And I said, it makes more sense to start with a 3D printer. It's lower engagement level. It's easier to learn. You have the profitability. And for him, it was about 4.5 months when he got, to the point where They were churning them out. It made profitability. He paid for the machine, and then everything on top of it really was net profit, right? At that point, because he had eliminated and worked with his lab and told his lab, this is what I'm doing. He was using a local lab. And they helped to collaborate with, because he kept the rest of the business. Now, fast forward another 14, 15 months later, because he did want to be able to mill out the crowns and do all of that. And he was kind of sort of playing with, maybe I'll do it on the printer, and then went, nope, I really want to go all in. And we looked at all the numbers, and in his area, because of where he lived, it was six figures to bring in a lab tech that had the skill and design and the mill and pick the right mill that. Here's the thing, the mill that fit within his entire ecosystem and workflow of where he was doing, because he was already doing clear aligners that was in a certain workflow. Some of you may know what I'm talking about. So do you go outside of that workflow, or do you stay in the workflow, because then you could print your clear aligners? Did you want to go away? I mean, all the things. And so the successful implementation, because he is very methodical. And so it was a really good match for us to go very methodically at it. And we've had others that are not that methodical and did the piecemeal thing and bought $50,000 milling machines, and they didn't work, and they just weren't working right. And it was a great deal, but then they had to be taken. And it really turned into chaos, because the expectations were not met, because it wasn't planned out as efficiently as it could have been. And those are the things to look at. And there's also other legal implications as well. If you're going to create a lab, what do you do with your legal entity? Do you create your lab as a separate entity and bill itself out to your practice? That's more of a CPA accountant thing. And do you have that good CPA form? So these are all the pieces in place that we bring into consideration, talk to the clients about. So it really is 360, because people have asked, well, sounds like you're more of like a practice management. No, we just know like the questions to ask and inquire. And if they don't have good resources for these things, we do know people that we can bring in that we've worked with and know and trust in order to ask the right questions. We know how to ask the right questions, but to bring in those that do the things in a very responsible way and have done it many times before, just like at Rebel 3D. I mean, what a great resource that if we get stuck and we're getting asked questions, I mean, I can bring to a certain level, but then it's ask the experts. Just as we talked about before, clinicians get really good at being clinical. And when you need to bring in experts, let your lead call people get really good at converting those leads, and let your treatment coordinators invest in them time, talent, and treasure to get really good at what they do with the patient engagement and converting those into starts. And, Richard Branson said, right, train people to where they can leave, treat them like they don't ever want to, right? And I'm bastardizing his phrase a little bit. I mean, he created a virgin empire, and how can you go wrong? Anybody who knows how to create virgins. I mean, let's just call it like it is, right, Rob? So
I love that. No, training is so important, empowering and lifting up your team. And there's another quote of, someone saying, well, if we train all our people really well, they'll leave us. And then the other person replies, well, what happens if we don't train them? And so
they stay. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, don't train them and they stay. I mean, it's like, well, so it really is the abundance mindset, right? If you train them up and, and if it's meant to be, they'll stay. And it's really about the way you treat your people. And you and I both know this, and, we both have experience in that for sure. And I think that's critically important. And it's a great message for all of the clinicians out there. And those that are probably listening and are more interested in really investing in what does it look like for digital and digital workflow, and what can I do to get better at my digital workflow to streamline and be more efficient, which helps in profitability, right? In the responsible way, when I have responsible digital workflow, that's an investment in people and places and your practice that really is going to attract individuals who want to move forward, right? There are certain dinosauric, and that's not really a word, right? But practices that are really living more in the past, and those that are forward reaching and forward thinking. And that's really what I'm sure that a lot of your listening audience is. And I think that's just critically important to be able to lift that up today.
Awesome. Well, Greg, I have really enjoyed this conversation. I'll drop your website and email and the comments of YouTube and LinkedIn wherever we post it. And I'm excited to be connected and network and help each other out and help our clients out. And hopefully the doctors that were listening today got some good value. The single sheet, the EAZ, empathy, acknowledge, and zeal. I love that. So some really great nuggets that are easy to remember and implement. So thank you, Greg. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.